What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Church Online. We are glad that you are here. We're in week 4 of this series that we're doing called Let's Be Real, where we're taking a look at God's design and purpose for some of our most important relationships, dating relationships, marriages, friendships, and today, parenting. It doesn't take a degree in sociology to recognize that in the last 50 years, the family unit in our society has changed a lot. However, I've noticed that there's something that's true of every family. No matter if it's a traditional family or a blended family or a single family, whatever kind of family, you name it. Every parent really wants to have a great relationship with their kids, and they want to raise them to be polite and respectful and thoughtful human beings. And as a church, we want the same things, but we believe that this has to start in the home. No matter what your situation looks like, we have to begin to talk about how we're going to leverage our time to build better relationships with our children and with our grandchildren. Now, when I say that word time, what comes to your mind? I think we can all agree that time is moving way too fast. It's limited. Maybe you feel like you don't have enough of it. But we'll never have more time than we do right now. So the issue that we need to talk about today is not how to get more time, but rather, how do we become more intentional about the time that we already have? How can we manage our time strategically so that we can make the greatest impact in our kids' lives? I want to show you an equation that I want you to remember. It goes like this. Time plus relationship equals influence. I'm going to say that again. Time plus relationship equals influence. So if you want to have influence with your family, especially with your kids or your grandkids, you have to give them time. And you have to give them a real relationship. But you might be thinking, how do I do that when my life is jam-packed with things that are really urgent, but not always important? How do we manage the tension of this busy, chaotic schedule and still find time for the things that are most important to us? There's a word that you're going to hear me use often in conversation, and that's this word rhythm. Rhythm. Rhythm is simply how we arrange our time. Every family has a rhythm. You don't have to intend to have one. You don't have to plan for one, but it's there. And so as we go from day to day, we establish and shape a rhythm that in turn shapes our children. So if we were to analyze the rhythm at your house, you would soon discover that much of your family life consists of these repeated patterns. And this is why we put newborns on a schedule as soon as possible. It's why we tend to go to the same gas stations, because familiar is efficient. It's why we keep a calendar. It's why we have sports schedules. It's why TV shows lock into certain time slots. Hear me on this. Our lives are largely programmed around a rhythm. Rhythm silently but significantly communicates value to our kids. The rhythms that happen every day in your home define what normal becomes for your family. It might become normal to go camping every summer. It might be normal to eat turkey at Christmas or to have pizza and a movie night on a Friday. Normal might include homework or going out to eat once a month or cleaning the house on a Saturday or knowing that dad is passionate about keeping his car in great shape. Parents determine what's normal by the rhythms that we establish in our homes. Rhythms in your home actually shape your family values. I mean, think about it. They establish what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. They determine what gets talked about and what doesn't get talked about. Things that become part of the daily rhythm are the things that our families will come to believe are most important. I think that's why the Apostle Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 5, beginning in verse 15. He says, "So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do." Establish rhythms in your life. Now, before I give you what I believe to be the 3 of the most important rhythms to establish in your family life, I want you to consider 2 mindset shifts that I believe that every parent needs to make. And the first is a mindset shift from additional to intentional. In other words, what am I going to stop doing so that I can start doing something else? If we're going to get serious about having steady rhythms in our lives, we have to change our approach. We have to stop piling things on to an already full plate. Think of it this way. What are you going to say no to so that you can say yes to something better? More about that in just a little bit. But the second mindset shift is a mindset shift from sporadic to consistent. And this goes right back to being intentional. We have to be consistent when we make decisions. We have to be consistent in asking the questions. Okay, how is this going to affect our family's rhythm? What are we going to say no to now so that we can say yes to something better? So I want you to keep these mindset shifts in the forefront of your brain as we look at these three incredibly important rhythms to establish in your family life. So the first one is this. We have to establish a rhythm of intentional listening. My 5-year-old daughter, Ava, is always vying for my attention. In fact, if I'm in the middle of something or if I'm otherwise distracted in that moment when she's trying to talk to me, she's actually started whistling at me. And she's not very good at it yet. So it's adorable and insanely annoying all at the same time. But your children want you to listen. They need to have a sense of approachability where they can come to you and talk to you about anything. See, the biggest obstacle in communication is not the inability to speak your mind. I think we're all pretty good at that. It's the inability to listen. Stephen Covey says it this way. He says, many people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. I know I am so guilty of that, but that's not really listening. James, the half-brother of Jesus, he gives us some great parental advice in James chapter 1, verse 19. He says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. A recent 2018 poll that asked tens of thousands of high school students who they turn to when they're stressed. I thought it was interesting that sadly, none of the responses included talking to their parents. The top answer, their phones. Now, I don't know about you, but I want my kids to turn to their mother and I when life smacks them in the face. And my guess is that you feel the same. Almost every parent wants to be close to their son, close to their daughter when they're in need of a friend. But it starts with us as parents committing to being more approachable. I wonder if we have any NASCAR fans tuning in right now. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm not a huge NASCAR fan. I'm not going to be one of those guys that sits there and watches the whole race. If you are, that's awesome. But you know what amazes me about NASCAR racing? It's the pit stops. I mean, those 5 guys that make up the pit crew are absolutely incredible. The driver pulls in and they all jump over the retaining wall in unison. And at the rear, the gas man he inserts the nozzle and he starts filling the tank up, and then the jack man starts raising the right side of the car, and the tire changers get the lug nuts off. And as soon as they do, the tire carriers bring in the tires while the jack man moves to the left side of the car and he jacks it up, and the same thing happens over on the other side, all in this synchronized fashion. And then he drops the car and he yells, go, go, go. And these 5 guys fill a 22-gallon tank and change 4 tires in, get this, less than 15 seconds. It's incredible. Now, here's one of my theories as to why kids don't feel like their parents are approachable. They see them as NASCAR parents, parents who think that they can do the parenting thing in less than 15 seconds. So Monday morning comes and they rev their engines and the race begins. And many days the race is so intense and so competitive that they don't make it home in time for dinner. Sometimes it's 8 or 9 o'clock at night when they come roaring into the pits. And they get out and they hug their kids and they scarf down dinner and they take a quick look at the report card and they pat their kids and say goodnight. And they go to bed early because they're already a lot behind and tomorrow they've got to make up some time. And when a kid really wants to talk about something, he or she isn't going to approach a NASCAR parent because, well, they're too busy or they're too tired. I mean, do you feel comfortable approaching someone that's grumpy or negative or tired or impatient or stressed out or busy? It can be really intimidating, can't it? I mean, think about how intimidating that is for a kid. Can I let you in on a little secret? Approachability to a child is spelled T-I-M-E. If a person thinks that you don't have time for them, they're not going to approach you. And that's tragic in the case of our kids. But the more time that we spend with our kids, the more trust is built with them. And the more that trust grows, the more approachable we become to them. You can't just do this parenting thing in 15 seconds. It's not a pit stop. It's the whole race. Now, when your child does approach you, there's a few things that I want you to keep in mind when they want to talk. And the first is this: don't be judgmental Don't have a critical spirit when they're telling you about what's going on in their brains. Don't be all-knowing. Don't pretend that you have all the answers to all of life's questions. And don't script out your answer while he or she is talking. It goes back to that Stephen Covey quote, right? Most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. So really, really listen. Dr. Ross Campbell says that one of the keys to communicating, especially with a teenager, is focused attention. It's saying, for the next few minutes, or however long this takes, it's just me and you right now. I'm locking eyes with you. I'm locking hearts with you, and nothing else in my world matters right now except for you. Just listen. Listen to them tell you about their dreams. Listen to them talk about their friends at school. Listen to them express their frustrations with their teacher or with their professor. Listen to them tell you about their crush. Listen to them talk about their new job. Listen to your preschooler stumble through trying to tell that story, painful and long as it may be. I'm not speaking from personal experience or anything. And don't forget, as you're listening, to ask questions. Questions like, well, what's wrong? Well, how do you feel about that? So what are you going to do about that? Dig a little bit deeper and then speak. As parents, we have to establish a rhythm of intentional listening in our families. The second rhythm that we need to establish is a rhythm of progressive freedom. You know, I've read that a mother bear drives her cubs up a tree when they're about 1.5 years old, and then she nips at them if they try to come down. And then she disappears. And when they finally dare to come down, they're on their own from that point on. And in human relations, it's just the opposite, isn't it? From the time that they're born, children seek their own independence and parents try to hold on. Toddlers will do just the opposite of what they're told. Preschoolers say, no, mommy, I'll do it myself. My son Benjamin has started insisting on buckling his own car seat, and it takes a solid 3 minutes for this to happen, and it is painful. Grade school children, they start keeping secrets from their parents. Teenagers don't want their parents hanging around, hovering over them. See, children instinctively crave independence. And let's be real, parents instinctively resist. No matter how old they are, we still want to oversee and correct our children. We want to protect our kids forever. So there's this natural kind of tug or war that's going on to see how much freedom can be achieved. And I believe that God designed the parent-child relationship to be one where parents give their children freedom, but they do it progressively. Take a look at Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4. This is what Paul says. He says, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. You know, I think that that word exasperate there, it really means that we're not to evoke an angry or a rebellious spirit in them. Colossians 3:21 says something very similar. It says, fathers, do not aggravate your children, or they will become discouraged. And you know, I think there's two extremes that can aggravate our kids. Extremes that can lead to them having an angry or a rebellious spirit. One extreme is being overly strict, and the other is being overly lenient. If you're a helicopter mom or a helicopter dad who never allows increased freedom, then you're unknowingly sowing the seed of rebellion later on. See, overly strict parents can have the nicest, most polite, most obedient kids when they're young. Everyone compliments these parents on how well-behaved their children are. But what can happen when there hasn't been any progressive freedom given is that they can leave home and have no idea how to handle their newfound freedom. And so they move out and they head to college, or they get a place of their own and they start working, but they're like a bull in a china shop, creating a mess in their own life and in the lives of those around them. But you know, I see much more of the opposite today. Too much freedom too early on, and your child becomes exasperated and aggravated because they know that they need boundaries. It's like we talked about in week 1. God gave us the gift of guardrails, and He wants us to model those for our children as well. And without guidelines, kids are like a train without a track, and they often feel unloved and neglected. But let's be real, laying down the law is not an easy job. Parents, we have this tremendous fear of rejection from our kids. So you'll hear parents say things like, well, if I try to restrict them or if I try to discipline them, they get angry and they withdraw and they make life miserable for me. In those times, it's good to remind yourself that you're not your kid's friend. You're their parent. That's the role that God gave you. And if you give too much freedom too fast because you're trying to be buddies with your kids, then kids get bored and they keep pushing the envelope into new and more dangerous areas. And I think that's one of the reasons why children are experimenting with drugs and alcohol and pornography and sex at younger and younger and younger ages, because kids need boundaries. Godly parenting means giving progressive freedom, but this is important. Progressive freedom has to be given with added responsibility. That's what our government does, is it not? Gives you driving privileges when you're 16, voting privileges when you're 18. It gives you the freedom to buy alcohol at the age of 21. Freedom is supposed to be limited by a sense of responsibility. And in the same way, wise parents also give reasonable, progressive freedoms as children grow older. When you're around elementary age, you might get to spend the night at a friend's house. When you're in middle school, your parents might give you a cell phone with limited access to apps. When you're in high school, you may get to start dating. When you're a senior, you might have a later curfew. But no, you can't stay in the hotel room on prom night. But Dad, don't you trust me? Nope, sure don't, not in the hotel room. When you go off to college, if I'm paying your bills, I expect to see your grades. If you're just there to have a good time, we're not going to finance the party life. Progressive freedom with added responsibility. When your kids get married or they settle into their own home and you're no longer paying their bills, then you release them completely and you become friends, as long as they want to be and as close as they want to be. But you release all rights to tell them what to do, and you're supportive. But if you haven't established a rhythm of progressive freedom early on, you might find that transition's a little tougher, but it's never too late to start. Intentional listening, progressive freedom, and the final and most important rhythm that we have to establish in our families is the rhythm of spiritual values. You see, it's not enough for your children to get into the right school or to make good grades and get a good job and earn lots of money. Those are all good things. But if your children don't learn spiritual values at home, if they don't learn to live with an eternal perspective, then they're not going to be prepared to face everything that the world throws at them as an adult. You're going to have to be intentional about looking for moments to tell your kids about God. Your kids will get more out of what you tell them about God on your way to school with them, or sitting on the couch in the family room, or discussing what God is personally doing in your life. They're going to get way more out of that than they would get 5 years worth of sermons that they hear from me or anybody else that preaches on this platform. Proverbs 22 verse 6 says this: "Start children off on the way that they should go, and even when they're old, they will not turn from it." Children sometimes make exterior changes so that their life doesn't resemble their parents on the surface. But for the most part, they can't escape the fact that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. They're going to be like you in many ways. And this is good, of course, because it means that you can pass your strengths on from generation to generation. But you have to believe that you have the potential to create rhythms in the life of your family that are going to impact your kids long after you're gone. And remember, the goal isn't to do everything, but to engage in doing something more. Here's how Jesus put it in Matthew 6, verse 33. He said, "Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness." Children aren't going to be taught that at school. And we only have them for maybe an hour or two a week at church. So parents, you have to teach them in the home. You are the primary spiritual leader of your child. Now, I want to offer a word of encouragement to parents here, because I know that you're busy. I know that you work hard, and finding time to teach your kids about God, it can be a real challenge. But I want you to know that it can be done. There's this pivotal moment in Scripture where Moses, the leader of the nation of Israel, he speaks to the entire nation. Okay, after waiting years and years, and there's just been wandering in the desert, the day finally approached when the Israelites would reclaim their homeland and they'd settle their families in their native country. Now, this is the last bit of wisdom that Moses is going to leave them with. This is his legacy. He gets up in front of all the Israelites, and what does he say? Well, He calls everyone to be responsible for how the next generation will be raised. His comments have incredible insights for all parents about their roles in influencing their children's relationships with God. And it's interesting to note that of all of the wisdom that Moses could have left them with, he chose above all other things to address their relationship with God and to make sure that they were daily instilling God's values into their children. Take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, beginning in verse 4. Moses says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all of your strength. These commandments that I give to you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up." Did you catch it? Moses is telling us as parents how to leverage the rhythms of our families that are already established to instill those spiritual values in them. And so he says, talk about them when you sit at home. Well, when I hear that, I think, well, that's mealtime. A recent survey found that 40% of American families eat dinner together only 3 or fewer times a week, with 10% never eating dinner together at all. Do you make dinner time a priority? Sitting down at the table as a family can be a great time for parents to assume the role of facilitator or teacher and target specific truths or ask specific questions. Moses goes on to say, talk about them when you walk along the road. Now these days, that might look more like drive time. Parents, how many of you take your kids to some sort of extracurricular activity, sports, theater, drama, whatever? The norm these days is for kids to put their earbuds in or to play a game on their phone. But what if you leverage that time as a friend and talk about life with your kids? Ask specific questions and help them make sense of life. I mean, they're stuck in the car. They're not going anywhere. Moses goes on to say, talk about them when you lie down. Now that's bedtime. Bedtime is a great time to get personal with your kids. They're safe, they're comfortable in their bed, they're more likely to share what's on their heart. I love bedtime with my kids. We always make sure to read books and to sing, and we pray, and we thank God for all the different things that He's blessed us with. And we have this Kids Laugh and Learn Bible, which always sparks interesting conversations and questions. Now, do I always have the answer? Nope. But parents, don't worry if you don't have the answer to every single spiritual question. Just stay committed to learning and growing as you help your kids learn and grow. And finally, Moses says, leverage when you get up. That's morning time. This is where mom and dad, whichever one's the morning person, assume the role of a coach, offering encouraging words and instilling value and purpose and helping our kids to want to tackle the day. Life is short. Seize every moment with your family and make a difference. As parents and as adults who have influence in the lives of kids, we ought to constantly be looking for opportunities to tell our kids that the most important thing in life is to be in a relationship with Jesus Christ. But we won't have those opportunities if we don't create them by establishing rhythms of intentional listening and giving progressive freedoms and instilling spiritual values. I read a convicting story recently of the value and the importance of making the family a priority. There was a middle-class family in the 40s that set a family goal of remodeling their old bathroom. And after a year of financial sacrifices, they finally had enough cash for the project. And so at the family meeting held to finalize the plans, one of the children suggested, well, why don't we use the money for a trip and fix the bathroom next year? Even though it involved a change in plans, and everyone seemed to like the suggestion, and so that summer they took the money and they went to Yellowstone National Park. Now with the money spent, the savings started all over again in order to do the proposed remodeling for next year. And when it came time to hire the contractor that next year, the family conversation drifted to how much they enjoyed that trip to Yellowstone, and the inevitable suggestion surfaced, well, why not put off the bathroom just one more year, take another family trip? And they all agreed. Now this scene was repeated every year from 1940 all the way up until 1950, when the youngest son was tragically killed in Korea. And on the night before his final battle, he wrote a letter to his parents. And the letter arrived months after the family had been notified of his death. There was this special emotion as mom and dad sat in their living room to read each other their son's last words. And in this touching letter, the young soldier expressed this premonition that he might soon die. And he thanked his folks for their love and their many happy experiences of growing up, especially recalling their annual family trips that they all shared. And this long silence followed as both quietly wept. And the silence was broken when the dad asked, "Honey, could you imagine a son writing home on the night before he died and saying how glad he was for a fancy new bathroom?" My dad went to be with the Lord a little over a decade ago when I was in college, and man, I'll never forget that call. And as someone who's lost a parent, I can tell you that it isn't the stuff that my dad got me that I remember. It isn't the nice house that we grew up in. It isn't the car that we drove that sticks out in my mind. You want to know what I remember? I remember having a dad who would sit at the kitchen table with me into all hours of the night, listening, laughing, encouraging, never judging, never condemning, always just being there, listening. We talk about girls, we talk about sports, school, friends, you name it. Nothing was off limits. I remember the trust that he put in me, giving me freedom to spread my wings. And man, when I fell flat on my face, which I did a lot, I remember him always being there to pick me back up and to dust me off. I remember him coming into my room and sitting on the edge of my bed with me. It's like our little version of a confessional. And he'd offer spiritual guidance. And he'd grab his Bible and he'd open it up and he'd point to some truth that he just knew that I needed to hear. And then we'd pray. We'd always talk to God. Little did I know that in just a few short years, he was going to leave this earth. And now, with two wonderful kids of my own, I think I finally understand my dad's words that he said to me on so many occasions. He'd say, "Mark, son, my biggest success in life as a father will be that I get to greet my kids in heaven someday."